The courtroom in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with quiet murmurs as the judge prepared to begin. A custody case was on the docket, but everyone sensed this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. Lawyers shuffled papers, the bailiff gave the usual stern glances, and reporters sat poised in the back row, already aware that this was a case to watch. But all eyes slowly turned to one person, a small, pale girl with wide, haunted eyes and a golden retriever sitting loyally at her feet. 10-year-old Emily Walker sat in silence at the witness stand, hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress and sneakers too clean for a child her age. Her hair was brushed neatly, but a tension hung about her like a fog. She had not spoken a single word in 6 months, not since the incident that ripped her life apart. But she was here today because, despite her silence, her presence was crucial. She was the only eyewitness to the trauma that led to her father's arrest. Max, the golden retriever beside her, was not just a pet. He was a trained trauma support and service dog, assigned to her weeks after the court-appointed therapists realized no traditional method could reach her. Emily had clung to Max the moment they met. He followed her everywhere, school, therapy, home, and now court. He never barked, never flinched, never left her side. It was as though he understood her better than anyone. Judge Martin Hartley peered down from the bench. He was seasoned, calm, and known for being fair. But even he shifted slightly when he looked at the girl. "Emily Walker," he began gently, "thank you for being here. We understand this is difficult. You don't have to speak if you're not ready. But we may ask you questions, and anything you can show or tell us will help." Emily didn't respond. Her fingers tightened around Max's fur. Her legs didn't move, nor did her expression. It was as if she were frozen, present, in body but unreachable in mind. Judge Hartley nodded in sympathy, then looked toward the prosecutor. "Your Honor," began Ada Karen Morales, "this child has endured significant trauma. With the court's permission, we will attempt questions but also explain her right not to respond. Her service dog is trained in a specialized communication method. We ask the court to allow his presence for both comfort and functionality." The judge nodded. "So ordered." Across the room, James Walker, Emily's father, sat in handcuffs, flanked by his defense attorney. His smirk didn't go unnoticed by the jury. The bruises from his initial arrest were long gone, replaced by a perfectly pressed suit and a manipulative charm he'd worn like a second skin all his life. He whispered something to his attorney, who glanced nervously at Emily. Karen stepped forward and gently asked, "Emily, do you remember the night of March 17th? No answer. "Do you remember who was in the house that night?" Still nothing. Karen's voice was soft. "You're safe now. Max is here. Nobody will hurt you." Max, sensing Emily's tension rising, leaned his body against her legs. Her breathing slowed slightly. Then her fingers moved, very subtly. One small movement, barely noticeable, along the back of Max's collar. A scratch, a flick, then stillness. To the surprise of the entire courtroom, Max stood up. He didn't bark or wag his tail. Instead, he calmly walked away from Emily, padding across the room toward her backpack, which sat just behind the witness chair on the floor. The judge leaned forward. "What is he doing?" he asked aloud. The bailiff moved toward Max, unsure whether to intervene. But Max had a purpose. He gently nudged the zipper of the bag open with his nose, and reached inside with surprising delicacy. Moments later, he pulled out a small, flat, black device, a digital audio recorder. He carried it in his mouth to the bailiff and placed it at his feet. Whispers exploded across the room. The judge raised a hand. "Order," he commanded. "What is that?" Emily's foster mother, seated just behind her, stood up quickly. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling. "Emily. She has a signal system with Max. That was a command. She's trying to tell you something." Emily, still silent, reached her hand out and made another gesture, this one slightly more obvious. She pressed her fingers together, thumb too, middle finger, then pointed toward the recorder. "She wants it played," her foster mother said quickly. "Please." The judge paused, clearly trying to process what was unfolding before him. "Is it admissible?" he asked the attorneys. "It can be," Corinne Morales replied, "if it's relevant and unaltered, and if the witness, even nonverbal, is offering it voluntarily." The judge nodded. "Play the recording." A technician took the device, plugged it into the court's audio system, and hit play. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a voice came through, deep, harsh, unmistakably male. "You breathe a word of this to anyone, and I swear you'll regret it. You think that dog will save you? You think that woman cares about you? Say one thing, just one, and I'll make you wish you hadn't." The courtroom gasped. It was James Walker. The recording continued, revealing more, angry words, threats, and finally, a chilling statement. "You're not even worth the trouble. No one will believe you. They never do." Corinne Morales whispered, "Your Honor, this is direct evidence of abuse, coercion, and obstruction of justice." James stood up. "That's fake. It's doctored." Judge Hartley banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Walker. You'll have your turn." Emily's eyes had not moved from Max once. He had returned to her side and leaned against her again, tail gently swishing. The judge turned to the courtroom and said, slowly, "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are witnessing something extraordinary." The courtroom remained frozen, every ear tuned to the crackling voice echoing from the speakers. James Walker's words were as damning as they were cruel. Emily didn't flinch. She kept her hand resting on Max's head, her expression unreadable, but strangely calm. The golden retriever's body was pressed firmly against her leg, his eyes scanning the room like a sentry. "Your Honor," Ada Corinne Morales said, regaining her voice, "this recording clearly demonstrates verbal abuse and threat against a minor witness. The voice has not been edited. It was retrieved in this courtroom by the child service dog without prompting by any officer." James's defense attorney stood quickly. "Objection. This recording violates California's two-party consent law. It's inadmissible." Judge Hartley narrowed his eyes. "That law doesn't apply when a minor is in danger or when the recording is provided as part of protective services. Sit down." The defense attorney opened his mouth to argue, but the judge's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Mr. Levitt, sit down." Silence. Corinne approached the bench. "We're not just dealing with a custody issue anymore, Your Honor. This is now a criminal matter. On behalf of the district attorney's office, I request the immediate consideration of additional charges: child endangerment, coercion, and obstruction." James, still standing, slammed his palm on the table. "You're all insane. That little brat, she's manipulating all of you." At that moment, Max stood up again. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. But his stance changed, stiff, protective, as if he understood something wasn't safe. Emily's hand hovered slightly above his back, trembling just enough for Max to respond. His body moved subtly in front of her, creating a shield. Judge Hartley stared down at James. "If you so much as raise your voice again in this courtroom, I will hold you in contempt. Bailiff, move him to the adjoining chamber until further notice." The bailiff didn't hesitate. As James shouted about setups and fake evidence, he was hauled out the side door in cuffs, leaving behind a room that felt less tense and somehow safer. Emily watched the door close and blinked slowly. Her foster mother stood and approached the witness box with caution. "She's okay," she told the judge softly. "She's telling Max to stand down." Max returned to his relaxed posture, tail swishing once as if proud of his work. "Corinne." Morales turned to the judge. "Emily and Max have been working with trauma specialists for months. She may not speak, but she communicates. That gesture she used? That's how she tells Max to retrieve something important. That's how she gave us this evidence." The judge rubbed his temples, clearly processing the surreal events. "I've presided over thousands of cases," he murmured, "but I've never seen anything like this." The courtroom remained still as he looked toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, although this is a custody hearing, it has now become a matter of criminal concern. You are not required to continue, but your observations are appreciated. I expect the DA to file additional charges within the day." Corinne nodded. "Already in motion, Your Honor." From the gallery, a few journalists whispered to one another, frantically typing on their laptops. Emily, for her part, stayed motionless, except for the rhythmic movement of her hand across Max's back. She wasn't petting him. She was communicating. The judge looked toward her. "Emily, if you understand me, blink twice." She blinked. "Twice. If you want to stay in this courtroom and continue, blink once." She blinked once. The courtroom collectively exhaled. Corinne turned toward Emily with gentleness. "Would you be willing to show us more? Not by speaking, just gestures. Did you bring the recorder today? Because you knew you'd need it?" Emily's hand gave a small signal. "She says yes," her foster mother interpreted. Corinne continued. "Did Max know to go get it only when you told him?" Another gesture. "She says yes again." The judge leaned forward. "That means this wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. A child unable to speak due to trauma just presented critical legal evidence using only a hand signal to a dog. That is beyond extraordinary." Whispers once again spread through the courtroom, a mix of awe and disbelief. Corinne paused for a moment, then looked toward Emily. "You've helped so many people already. You're safe now, Emily. Max kept you safe. Would you like to leave the room?" Emily shook her head. Corinne smiled softly. "Of course you wouldn't. You're stronger than most adults I know." With the courtroom settled again, the judge turned serious. "Before I adjourn for a recess, I want to acknowledge what we've all just witnessed. This young girl through silent courage and trust in her service dog has done more to present the truth than most adult witnesses can manage." He glanced down at Max and chuckled gently. "And as for you," the judge stood, unpinned a small golden badge from his robe, and gestured toward Max. "Come here, boy." Max stood, and with a slight wag of his tail, walked confidently toward the bench. The bailiff guided him around the bar. The judge knelt another rare sight and clipped the pin to Max's collar. "In 30 years on this bench, I've given out commendations to officers, attorneys, and public servants," he said, his voice steady, "but never to a dog. Today that changes." The courtroom erupted in gentle applause, some people rising to their feet. Emily watched, eyes wide, as her silent guardian stood proudly, badge gleaming. The judge looked toward the prosecutor. "We will reconvene tomorrow, but I want a full psychological assessment of Emily filed before then, and charges for Mr. Walker prepared." Corinne nodded. "Already done." As Max returned to Emily, she wrapped her arms around him tightly. For the first time in months, her shoulders relaxed. Outside, cameras waited. No one inside knew it yet, but the story was already being shared across social media. By morning, the world would know about the girl who said nothing, and yet told everything. By the next morning, headlines across the country were ablaze with the story of Emily Walker and her dog, Max, the dog who testified. Girl breaks silence through her canine hero. Courtroom shaken by child's brave signal. Every major outlet covered the moment Max retrieved the hidden recording and exposed James Walker in open court. But Emily herself remained out of reach. Her foster mother refused interviews. Emily stayed home, tucked into her quiet room, drawing pictures of Max wearing a cape. Inside the courtroom that day, tension returned like a heavy fog. James Walker was back, this time secured by 2 bailiffs. His public defender, now replaced by a more aggressive attorney, had filed a motion to suppress the recording entirely, calling it illegally obtained, misleading, and emotionally manipulative. But he couldn't change the facts. The voice on the tape was clearly James Walker's. And Emily, despite never uttering a word during the last 6 months, had made her first courtroom move, and it had worked. Judge Hartley entered the courtroom with a tired but resolute expression. "We resume proceedings in the matter of Walker v. State," he said. "Ada Morales, your office has submitted new charges against the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor. 3 counts, child endangerment, intimidation of a minor witness, and obstruction of justice," Karen said clearly. The judge turned to James's new attorney. "And you still intend to argue the recording is inadmissible?" "I do," the attorney said, standing. "Your Honor, my client was recorded without his knowledge, violating his privacy rights. This is California. 2-party consent law is explicit." Karen stepped forward. "There are exceptions, Your Honor. When a child is in danger or has no other recourse for help, precedent allows for recordings that protect that child. This case qualifies on all counts." The judge nodded. "I'll hear both sides. But be aware, the bar is high. If I believe this recording was critical to uncovering abuse, I will admit it." In the witness area, Emily sat again with Max, wearing the same blue dress. Max rested calmly at her feet. Her foster mother sat behind her, occasionally interpreting. Emily's hand signals when needed. Karen turned and addressed the room. "Before we debate the legality, let's understand the impact. This child was so terrified of her father, so silenced by trauma, that she couldn't speak. But she found a way to tell the truth. This wasn't manipulation. This was survival." The judge paused. "Is Emily prepared to answer questions?" Karen looked back. Emily gave a small nod. Max nudged her gently, reassuring her. "We'll keep it simple," Karen said softly, moving toward the stand. "Emily, did anyone else help you plan that recording?" Emily blinked twice. "No." "Did you give Max the command to retrieve it in court?" She gave the subtle hand signal again. 2 fingers tapped, palm turned. "Yes." Karen looked at the judge. "Your Honor, this child independently built her own evidence chain. She knew the risks. She followed a training method used by trauma therapy professionals and service dog handlers. Max was simply the delivery system. The courage was all hers." James's attorney scoffed. "She's a child. You're giving her too much credit. She can't testify. She can't even speak." Karen didn't flinch. She just did. The courtroom murmured in response. Judge Hartley raised his hand. "Order." He looked down at Emily, who sat quietly with Max, curled at her feet. "Emily," he said gently, "is there anything else you want us to know?" She didn't move at first. Then slowly, her hand rested on Max's head again. Her fingers moved once, twice, then paused. Max responded immediately. He stood, walked over to the corner of the courtroom, where a large, red binder had been placed by Emily's foster mother, and returned with it gently held in his mouth. He dropped it beside Karen's feet. Karen opened it slowly. Inside were drawings over, 24 of them. Each one showed scenes of Emily and her father. In some, he loomed like a shadow. In others, she was curled under a bed while he yelled. The final page showed Max sitting in a courtroom, retrieving a small black recorder from her backpack. The image was nearly identical to the real thing. Corinne's voice cracked as she held up the final drawing. She's been planning this for months. The judge stared at the image, lips pressed tightly together. Then he looked at James. "Mr. Walker, do you deny being the voice in that recording?" James crossed his arms. "Of course I do. Anyone could have faked that." Corinne raised a photo from a forensics lab. "We've run voice analysis. Your Honor, there is a 98.9% vocal match to Mr. Walker. Combined with this child's visual documentation, the signal-based command system, and behavioral observations by court-appointed psychologists. It's irrefutable." Judge Hartley sat back in silence for several moments. Finally, he leaned forward. "Motion to suppress is denied. The evidence stands." James exploded. "You can't do this. She's a mute little brat with a stupid dog." Gasps echoed. Max stiffened, teeth bared. He didn't growl, but the threat was clear. The bailiffs were already moving. James was restrained, yelling obscenities as they dragged him from the courtroom. The jury watched in stunned silence. Judge Hartley banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow. I will be issuing a contempt charge for the defendant, and he is now to be held without bail." Emily remained calm through it all. Her eyes didn't follow her father. She stayed focused on Max, who now laid his head across her lap. Corinne turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the bravery of this child." He raised a hand gently. "Needs no more words, Miss Morales. We've heard everything we need." As the gallery emptied, reporters whispered again. No photos had been allowed, but sketches were already circulating. Emily Walker had become a symbol. Outside the courthouse, people waited, holding up signs of support. "We believe you, Emily." "Thank you, Max." Truth needs no voice. Inside, Emily hugged Max tightly. She hadn't spoken aloud yet, but the silence no longer felt heavy. In fact, for the first time in a long while, it felt powerful. The next morning, Judge Hartley arrived in the courtroom early. He didn't go straight to his chambers as usual. Instead, he walked slowly around the empty room, pausing by the witness stand, then at the jury box, then at the defense table. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and looked up at the ceiling, as if asking unseen forces for guidance. What had begun as a custody hearing had spiraled into a national moment of reckoning. A child who didn't speak had shattered silence across the country, not with words, but with courage and a dog named Max. By the time court convened at 9 a.m., the media frenzy outside the courthouse had reached a fever pitch. A line of people stretched down the sidewalk, many of them holding up handmade signs. "Justice for Emily, Max is a hero, and believe the silent." Inside, the room was packed. Court officials had installed additional security. Though cameras were still banned, sketch artists filled every corner. The story had taken on a life of its own. Emily arrived quietly with her foster mother. She wore the same blue dress, but this time there was something different in her posture, an ease, a subtle confidence. Max walked beside her, tail wagging. Slowly, wearing his new golden pin on his collar, the one Judge Hartley had personally awarded him for bravery in service to justice. James Walker was brought in last, now flanked by 2 armed deputies. His face had changed. Gone was the arrogant smirk. He looked tired, angry, cornered. Judge Hartley entered. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked out over the crowd. "Before we proceed with legal matters," he began, "I want to say something, not as a judge, but as a human being." The room went quiet. Yesterday, I witnessed something extraordinary. A child who has endured unspeakable trauma walked into this courtroom and communicated more effectively than any words could. She used her mind, her bond with her service animal, and her inner strength to present the truth. No screaming. No manipulation. Just raw, honest courage. He paused. Emily Walker has reminded us all what justice is supposed to look like. He turned toward her. I know you don't want to speak yet, and you don't have to. But I want you to know, from this bench, from this robe, from this court, you are seen, and you are heard. Emily blinked slowly and lowered her eyes. Max leaned into her gently, tail flicking once. The judge stood a rare move in court. He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a box. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped down from the bench and walked across the courtroom toward Max. Everyone watched, stunned, as Judge Hartley knelt beside the golden retriever and opened the box. Inside was a metal shiny, engraved, and official. In all my years, I've handed out certificates, commendations, and court orders, he said, voice steady. But never once have I given an award for moral courage. He clipped the medal onto Max's vest, right next to the pin. This is for your service, for listening, for protecting her when no one else could, for helping her find her voice without ever needing one yourself. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Max stood still, tail wagging slowly. Emily smiled softly. The judge returned to the bench, composed himself, and looked toward the attorneys. Now, let's get back to the business of justice. Corinne Morales stood. Your Honor, we are now requesting permanent termination of all parental rights for Mr. Walker and a recommendation for full adoption by Emily's current guardian, Mrs. Sullivan. James's attorney stood immediately. Objection. That process cannot be initiated until criminal proceedings are complete. The judge waved him off. This hearing is still part of family court. Criminal charges may take months, but we can take protective action now. James stood up abruptly. This is a setup. That kid doesn't even talk. Before he could say another word, the judge pointed. Mr. Walker, sit down or you'll be escorted out again. James sat fuming. Corinne turned to Emily once more. You've done enough, Emily. You don't need to answer anything. But if you want to stay here today, blink twice. Emily blinked once, then again. She wants to stay, her foster mother said softly. Corinne nodded, and the proceedings resumed. Over the next hour, testimony came from Emily's school counselor, her trauma therapist, and a court-appointed child psychologist. All of them said the same thing. Emily had endured psychological and physical abuse for years. She had learned not to speak because speaking led to pain. Her silence was survival. Her bond with Max was the only reason she had begun to heal. By the time the final witness finished, even the court stenographer had tears in her eyes. The judge turned to James. Do you have anything to say? James looked around the courtroom. His face hardened. You're all falling for this. Silent act. That mutt probably recorded half the people in the house. Who knows what that brat edited together? Gasps echoed. Emily didn't move. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough, Mr. Walker, based on the testimony, the evidence, and the overwhelming weight of professional evaluations. I am ordering your immediate suspension of all custodial rights. James shouted, You can't do this. I just did, the judge replied coldly. And let the record show your conduct today only confirms the danger you pose. He looked back toward Emily and Max. This court will reconvene in 2 days to finalize permanent guardianship recommendations. Until then, Ms. Sullivan has full protective custody. The session ended, and the room slowly emptied. But people lingered longer than usual, glancing at the girl who never spoke and the dog who never needed to. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to shout questions as Emily exited with Max and her foster mother, but she didn't stop. Instead, Emily reached down, tugged gently at Max's vest, and gave a signal. Max raised his head and barked once. The crowd cheered. No one understood the full signal, but everyone understood its meaning. Emily Walker may not speak often, but today, everyone had heard her loud and clear. By the next morning, Emily Walker was a national name. Cable news outlets ran the courtroom sketch of her seated beside Max. Social media was flooded with videos, photos, and clips of experts analyzing her silent bravery. Max's image, his golden fur, calm posture, and shining metal, was everywhere. Hashtag Emily and Max trended for 2 days straight. Thousands of people called her the girl who spoke without a voice. But inside the modest home she shared with her foster mother, Mrs. Sullivan, Emily remained quiet. She wasn't interested in the headlines. She didn't ask about the internet. Instead, she sat on the living room floor with crayons and blank paper, drawing picture after picture of Max. Each drawing showed a different moment. Max in court, Max fetching the recorder, Max standing between her and her father. Max was her protector, her translator, her voice. Mrs. Sullivan entered the room and gently placed a tray of fruit beside her. "I know you don't want to talk about it, sweetie," she said softly, "but people want to help. We've had hundreds of messages. Even someone from CNN called." Emily didn't look up. She was drawing Max with a superhero cape. Mrs. Sullivan sighed and sat beside her. "You've already helped more people than you know." She handed Emily a tablet and opened an email from a trauma therapist in Oregon. It read, "My client, a 9-year-old mute boy, saw your daughter's story. He asked if he could learn hand signals for his dog too. For the first time in over a year, he smiled. Tell her thank you." Emily looked at the message, then down at Max. Her fingers curled around his collar in that familiar rhythm. Max responded with a quiet nuzzle to her side. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Sullivan rose to answer it and found Karen Morels on the porch, holding a manila envelope and a soft smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Karen said. I wanted to deliver this in person." She stepped inside, handed Mrs. Sullivan the envelope, and knelt beside Emily. "Hi, Emily," she said gently. "I brought something for you and Max." Emily tilted her head slightly, intrigued. Karen opened the envelope and pulled out a certificate bearing the seal of the district attorney's office. It read, "Commendation of Courage, awarded to Emily Walker and Max for extraordinary bravery and service in the pursuit of justice." Emily blinked twice. Karen smiled. "That's for you. You earned it." Mrs. Sullivan wiped away a tear. Emily slowly reached out and touched the certificate. She tapped it once, then touched Max's head. "She says it belongs to him too." Mrs. Sullivan translated. Karen placed a second, smaller envelope on the table. "There's one more thing. A foundation reached out, one that trains service dogs for children like Emily. They want to launch a scholarship fund in Max's name." Emily looked up sharply. "It would help other kids get dogs just like Max," Karen said. "But only if you say yes." Emily gave a quick signal. Her foster mother interpreted immediately. "She wants to call it the Max Trust." Karen nodded. "It's done." Over the next week, donations poured in. The Max Trust raised over $500,000. In its first 3 days, celebrities shared the story, including a famous talk show host who called it the most beautiful display of silent strength she'd ever seen. The court scheduled its next hearing for Friday, when Judge Hartley would finalize the permanent custody order and rule on James Walker's parental termination. But while Emily's world grew safer, her father's legal team was quietly planning their next move. James's new lawyer, Grant Marlowe, wasn't interested in public opinion. He was ruthless, technical, and had one goal: get the recording thrown out. He filed an emergency motion, arguing that the recording violated the Fourth Amendment, Emily's rights as a minor, and California's wiretap laws. He accused the prosecution of weaponizing a traumatized child's behavior to manipulate the motion shocked the DA's office. If the judge even partially agreed, Emily's testimony, even through Max, could be undermined. Worse, her credibility could be attacked, opening her to further trauma. Karen Morales received the motion at midnight and reviewed it with clenched teeth. She had expected a fight, but not one so cold, so calculated. The next morning, she drove straight to the courthouse and met with Judge Hartley in chambers. "He's trying to discredit her entire experience," she said, dropping the motion onto the desk. "He's calling Max a prop and her behavior coached performance." The judge frowned deeply. "This girl risked everything to tell us the truth. And she did it through sheer will and a service dog. He's going to argue that the dog was manipulated and that Emily was led into fabricating evidence," Karen said. "He wants the recording disqualified retroactively. If that happens, we'll lose the strongest piece of evidence." The judge nodded slowly. "Then we'll need stronger support, expert testimony, and most of all, the girl." Karen hesitated. "She still hasn't spoken. I don't want to push her." "Then we don't," Judge Hartley said. "But if she decides to speak on her own terms, that might be the moment everything changes." That night, Mrs. Sullivan gently explained to Emily that her father's lawyer wanted the judge to ignore the recording. Emily listened quietly, Max's head in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply looked at Max and began petting him, slow, purposeful strokes that followed a rhythm only the two of them understood. Then, without saying a word, she stood up, walked to her bedroom, and pulled something from under her bed. It was another recorder. Her foster mother stared in surprise. "Emily, is that another one?" Emily gave a signal. Mrs. Sullivan gasped. "She says this one has the rest. Everything he ever said." Emily placed the recorder on the table and sat down beside Max. Outside, the world was watching. Inside, Emily was preparing her final move, not with rage, not with words, but with truth. And Max would be right there when it came time to reveal it. Karen Morales could hardly believe what she was holding. Emily had produced a second recorder, this one older and more worn. Its label read simply, "Red Backpack." Mrs. Sullivan explained that Emily had kept it hidden since before her removal from her father's custody. "It was her escape plan," Mrs. Sullivan said. "She never told me there was another one." Karen felt a mix of awe and heartbreak. This child had documented her trauma long before anyone came to help. She had saved herself. Karen transferred the files immediately. When she pressed play, James Walker's voice spilled out once more, this time more unfiltered, more incriminating. He was drunk, slurring, and furious. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're a nothing. Just a mute little pest with a stuffed animal for a brain. If you open your mouth, I'll make you regret it." Another clip. "You think that mutt's gonna protect you? I'll make sure it disappears just like your mother did." Karen stopped the playback, trembling. These weren't just threats, they were violent admissions. And now they had a pattern of abuse documented over months. She filed the new evidence with the court and requested an emergency hearing. Judge Hartley agreed without hesitation. Friday, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread of the new evidence. Emily and Max entered with Mrs. Sullivan, both calm. Despite the crowd, Emily wore a white sweater with small dog prints on the sleeves. Max had a fresh blue vest that read, "Service dog, do not pet." James Walker sat at the defense table, stone-faced, Grant Marlowe whispering into his ear. Corinne Morales, prepared and composed, carried a small flash drive in her palm, the audio that could destroy everything James had denied. But first, the judge addressed the elephant in the room, Marlowe's motion to suppress the original recording. "I've reviewed your claims," Judge Hartley said, "and though they raise complex legal questions, I do not find sufficient basis to disqualify evidence voluntarily provided by the victim, especially when her own safety was in question." Marlowe stood. "Your Honor, this child is not mentally fit to consent to such an act." "Mr. Marlowe," the judge cut in, his tone sharp, "I've seen adults less aware of their surroundings than this girl." "Sit down." Corinne rose. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce additional evidence. Recordings made by the victim during the months leading up to her removal from the home. They demonstrate a sustained pattern of abuse, threats, and intimidation." The judge nodded. "Play them." As the courtroom quieted, the first clip played. James's angry voice echoed from the speakers. Emily remained still, Max's head resting in her lap. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. In one particularly chilling clip, James said, "You don't deserve friends. That dog's the only thing that won't leave you." When the recording ended, silence hung in the air. Then the judge spoke. "Miss Morales, do you wish to call the victim to testify?" Corinne turned to Emily. The girl looked back at her then. At Max. She gently tapped a pattern on his back. Max stood. Corinne's breath caught in her throat. Emily rose slowly from her seat. The courtroom held its breath. She walked to the witness stand without prompting. The bailiff swore her in, voice trembling slightly. Corinne approached. "Emily, would you like to speak today?" Emily took a deep breath, then nodded. Her voice, soft but clear, carried across the room. "My dog knew I was scared," she began. "But he never left. He helped me say things I couldn't." Tears welled in Corinne's eyes. She let the silence linger, giving Emily space. Emily continued, stronger now. "My dad told me if I talked, I'd lose Max. That's why I stayed quiet. But Max stayed anyway." The courtroom was still, stunned by the moment. Corinne whispered, "Why did you record him?" Emily looked directly at her father. "Because no one believed me the first time." Judge Hartley leaned forward, visibly moved. "Emily, you've done more than any child should ever have to. But you've also shown us courage beyond your years." "Thank you." Emily returned to her seat, Max following loyally. Then the judge made his ruling. "I find the evidence overwhelming. James Walker is hereby stripped of all parental rights. He will remain in custody pending trial on charges of child endangerment, criminal threats, and abuse. Furthermore, I'm granting permanent custody of Emily Walker to Mrs. Sullivan." Applause erupted. James shouted something unintelligible as he was escorted out by deputies. Corinne turned to Emily. "You did it." Emily nodded but didn't smile. She reached down, pet Max, and whispered, "We did." Later that evening, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Corinne gave a brief statement. Justice was served today, and it was served not by lawyers or judges, but by a little girl and her best friend. A microphone was gently placed in front of Emily. One reporter asked, "Emily, what would you like to say to other kids like you?" Emily hesitated. Then she looked into the camera and said, "Believe your dog. He knows." The clip went viral within minutes. That night, Emily sat with Max in her room, flipping through a scrapbook Mrs. Sullivan helped her create. It was filled with court drawings, photos, and letters from other children. One letter stood out, "Dear Emily, I'm 8. I never talk either, but my dog helped me go to school. You made me feel like I can do more. Love, Lily." Emily smiled for the first time all day. Outside her window, A soft breeze passed through the trees. Inside, the quiet was peaceful, not tense. She had taken the fear that silenced her and turned it into something louder than any scream truth. And Max had made sure the world heard it. Within 48 hours of Emily's simple words, "Believe your dog," "He knows," the internet exploded. News networks replayed the video endlessly. Social media lit up with hashtags like #SilentCourage and #MaxTheHeroDog. People across the country, and even overseas, began sharing their own stories of trauma, healing, and the dogs that stood by them. Emily's quiet strength struck a nerve. She had become the voice of thousands who couldn't speak for themselves. But she wasn't looking for fame. At her foster home, nestled on a quiet street in Pasadena, Emily sat on the floor with Max, stroking his ears. She didn't understand the world's sudden attention, didn't want it. She had said what she needed to say. That should have been the end. But for the world, it was just the beginning. Corinne Morales, exhausted but inspired, had no idea what awaited her that morning. Her office phone wouldn't stop ringing. News producers, publishers, advocacy groups all wanted to speak with her or with Emily. Even a U.S. Senator's office had reached out, requesting Emily's appearance at a Youth Protection Committee hearing. Corinne wasn't thrilled. She had fought hard to protect Emily's privacy in court. Now the whole world wanted a piece of her. She called Mrs. Sullivan. "We have to be careful. This could overwhelm her." "I agree," Mrs. Sullivan replied. But Emily saw some of the messages. "She wants to help other kids." Corinne blinked. "Wait, she does?" "She wrote something," Mrs. Sullivan said. "She's been working on it all night." An hour later, Corinne opened an email. It was from Emily, typed with help from Mrs. Sullivan. Just a few sentences. "I didn't talk because I was scared. Now I want to help other kids talk. But not everyone has a Max. Maybe I can help get them one." Corinne's eyes welled with tears. The next week, Corinne worked with a small group of advocates, lawyers, and therapists to help Emily's idea become reality. They launched a new nonprofit, Max's Mission, dedicated to pairing service dogs with children recovering from trauma. Corinne leveraged her legal connections. Mrs. Sullivan tapped into the foster care network, and animal trainers across the country volunteered. Donations flooded in after a national interview aired on NBC Nightly News. Emily watched the broadcast from her couch, her feet tucked under her, Max's head on her lap. She said nothing, but a small smile crept across her face. Meanwhile, James Walker's situation had worsened. His second public defender had quit, unable to deal with his volatile behavior. New charges had been filed: witness intimidation, obstruction, and a civil suit from the foster agency alleging negligence that allowed him to retain custody for too long. In prison, James fumed at the news coverage. He'd become a national villain, the man who terrorized his daughter until she built her own silent case against him. A jailhouse informant leaked a letter James wrote to a relative. In it, he denied everything and accused Emily of framing him with that stupid mutt. Public opinion soured further. Judge Hartley, now something of a local hero himself, scheduled James's criminal trial for the following month. Back in Pasadena, Emily was about to receive another surprise. Corinne visited the Sullivan house, carrying a manila envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Judge Hartley. It read, "Dear Emily, you reminded this court that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through loyalty and love. Your story will change how we treat young victims. I am submitting a proposal to our judicial board, a new courtroom protocol to allow certified service dogs as silent supporters for minor witnesses. I am calling it the Max Provision. Thank you for teaching us all." Corinne handed the letter to Emily without speaking. The girl read it slowly, tears welling. In her eyes, she didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Max wagged his tail, sensing something big had happened. Weeks passed. Emily's story became a national case study in law schools and therapy programs. Max's mission reached 500,000 followers online. Celebrities donated. One woman sent $100,000 in memory of her own childhood service dog. Emily remained quiet. Through it all, still attending therapy, still processing. But something inside her had shifted. Mrs. Sullivan noticed Emily smiling more. She began humming again. She even started doodling comics of Max, saving children in capes and boots. One day, she handed a drawing to Karen. It showed Max sitting in a courtroom, wearing a judge's robe. The caption read, "Judge Max, Defender of Kids." Karen framed it and placed it in her office. Then came a letter from the White House. The president's team had seen Emily's speech and wanted to honor her at the National Children's Advocacy Awards. They invited her and Max to Washington, D.C., offering full accommodations. Karen wasn't sure, but Emily nodded immediately. "I want to go." For the first time in months, her voice didn't shake when she said it. In Washington, Emily stood on a stage beside Max, wearing a navy blue dress. A crowd of senators, advocates, and child welfare professionals filled the grand ballroom. The host announced, "For her bravery, her heart, and her trust in the silent truth, we honor Emily Walker and her dog, Max." A standing ovation erupted as Emily walked to the podium. She clutched the mic tightly. Cameras flashed. Max sat calmly beside her. She spoke softly, but everyone heard. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. I thought being quiet meant I was alone. But I had Max, and now I have all of you. Thank you for hearing me." The audience was in tears. Even Karen, watching from the back, couldn't hold it in. As the night ended, a journalist approached Karen. "Do you think Emily realizes what she started?" Karen glanced at the child, surrounded by kids and parents, Max wagging his tail in circles. Around her, "No," she smiled. "And that's what makes it even more powerful." Months had passed since Emily's moment in Washington, D.C., yet the ripples of her bravery still spread wide. The Max provision had officially been adopted in several states, allowing service dogs to accompany minor witnesses in court to provide comfort and nonverbal communication. Judges and attorneys reported a new sense of calm and confidence in vulnerable children. Back in Pasadena, Emily's life was changing quietly but profoundly. She was still mostly silent, but now her silence felt less like a cage and more like a shield. She attended a new school tailored to her needs, surrounded by teachers who understood trauma and communication through gestures. One crisp autumn morning, Emily and Max walked together in the park near her foster home. Leaves crunched beneath their feet as sunlight filtered through amber branches. Emily clutched a small bundle of letters in her hand, correspondence from children around the country touched by her story. Mrs. Sullivan followed at a distance, carrying a basket of snacks. "Look at this one, Emily," Mrs. Sullivan said softly, kneeling beside her. This girl from Ohio wrote that she finally spoke after getting a dog just like Max. Emily's eyes sparkled as she traced the child's handwriting. Another letter was from a boy in Texas who used Max's trust signals to help his own dog understand when he felt scared. Emily smiled faintly, feeling a connection to thousands of other children whose voices had been lost and who were now finding ways to be heard. At the same time, Corinne Morales was preparing for the upcoming trial of James Walker. It was the most important case of her career. She had built it meticulously, relying heavily on Emily's recordings, expert testimony, and the groundbreaking use of service dogs as evidence companions. During pre-trial meetings, Corinne reflected on how the courtroom had transformed. It was no longer just a place of legal procedure, but a space where justice and compassion intersected. On the morning of the trial, Judge Hartley entered the courtroom. With a steady gaze, the press was waiting outside, cameras flashing, but inside, the atmosphere was solemn and focused. James Walker sat at the defense table, looking defeated. Corinne addressed the court. "Your Honor, we are ready to proceed." The trial began with testimony from therapists, social workers, and child welfare experts, each detailing the abuse Emily had suffered and the psychological barriers she faced. Then came Emily's turn. This time, she didn't walk alone. Max stood beside her in the witness box, his vest gleaming. Emily, still mostly silent, used the hand signals she and Max had practiced for months. She communicated her feelings, her memories, and her fears. The jury watched in rapt attention, moved by the silent yet powerful exchange. Her foster mother translated, but often the images on Emily's face told the story better than words ever could. Days later, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. James Walker was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Outside the courthouse, Corinne hugged Mrs. Sullivan. "Justice for Emily," she whispered. Emily waited quietly by Max's side. When asked if she wanted to say something, she merely tapped Max's head and smiled. In the weeks that followed, Max's mission expanded rapidly. Funds enabled the training of dozens more service dogs, bringing hope to children in shelters, foster homes, and hospitals across the country. Emily became a quiet ambassador for the cause. Though she shied from interviews and crowds, she wrote letters and sent drawings to the children helped by the foundation. Her foster mother shared a story one evening. Last week, Emily helped train a new dog named Luna. She taught the handlers the special signals Max used, how to listen when words fail. Emily nodded, a shy smile breaking through. "It's like she's passing the torch," Mrs. Sullivan said softly. One evening, Emily sat in her room, Max curled beside her, when a soft knock came at the door. It was Judge Hartley visiting. Unannounced, "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for teaching all of us the meaning of courage and silence." He handed her a small box. Inside was a bronze statue Max in mid-leap, ears flapping, eyes focused. Emily held it carefully. "I'm going to put this where everyone can see," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The judge smiled. "I think the whole world should see it." Years later, Emily would look back on that courtroom, that dog, and that silent signal as the moment her life and many others' lives changed forever. She found strength, not in speaking loudly, but in speaking truly. And Max remained. By her side, her protector, her voice, her hero. Together, they built a legacy of hope, proving that sometimes the quietest voices can make the loudest impact.